Hey y'all, so today I'd like to talk about a very important concept to me and something that I feel like I see a lot of people kind of misinterpret or just not even understand in the first place, online or in real life, and that is the importance of averages and knowing the difference between a generalization and an average. Um, but also, I'd like to talk about where averages can fail. I want to talk about both of those. Um, This is actually an example. I'm stealing this from somewhere else, but I forget where, so I can't give credit. But let's say we have a drawing of 19 red circles sprawled completely randomly across a piece of paper and one blue circle. And I make the statement, oh, most of these circles are red. Or even just, a lot of these, or the majority of these circles are red. And I even say, it's decently safe to assume that if I pick a circle at random from this piece of paper, I point to one at random, it will be a red circle. If somebody is to come along and to try to disprove those statements by saying, oh, yeah, but what about this circle? That one's blue. Then that person is stupid and they should kill themselves. So, what do I mean by this? This can be applied to real life. Um, if you were to say, the average height of a certain country, right? Like the average woman in Nepal is 4'11". So if you pick a completely random woman out of any of the women in Nepal, technically, chances are she will be 4'11". If somebody is to try and disprove this statement by saying, well, I know a woman from Nepal and she's 5'4", then it's like, I believe you, but you're not really actually saying anything of substance in this discussion. Um, people really just don't understand the phrases in general and on average, just like on just a large scale. Those are two very underrated and underutilized phrases, I feel. Um, and there are a million different examples of this. I could do the exact same thing, but I say like, oh, most Scandinavians are tall, and then someone comes along and it's like, well, the only Scandinavian I know is 5'8". Um, you're not proving anything. On the flip side, there's also a lot of instances in which averages and statistics can fail. When you can cite an average statistic and the average is skewed somehow in such a way that makes it so it really shouldn't be considered. My favorite example of this is from the Kill Count YouTube series. Um, what's his name? James A. Janice is his name. Who does that? The Final Destination kill count at the very beginning of the movie, or towards the beginning of Final Destination. Spoiler alert, guys. I think it's about 283 people die in a plane crash. And one of the staples of the kill count series is that they always like to calculate, on average, how many people died per second or per minute or whatever it is throughout the movie. And usually that's actually like a useful statistic because most horror movies, um, or at least a good chunk of them, will be some kind of like semi episodic, like kind of a thriller or a slasher, and like someone will die just every so often. People will get killed off one at a time, uh, from being picked out of an ensemble cast. Like that's your typical '80s slasher, um, overview. Like that's what tends to happen. So most of the time, that is a useful average and will actually tell you how often, on average, somebody gets killed, or like the rough amount of time in between each kill in the movie. However, with Final Destination, at the very beginning of the movie, 283 unnamed people die in the plane crash. So technically, on average, if you take the runtime of the movie and you just divide that by number of deaths, or is it the other way around? One of the two. Technically speaking, somebody dies on average, like every 30 seconds in Final Destination, but that's just not actually a useful average. Now, how can that one be extrapolated into real life? I'll tell you guys. What is the average American income? What's the average household income in America? If you look up the total average income, then you'll get some figure in the 80,000s for most years. Um, but then, like, what if we exclude the top 10% of earners, which hold a very disproportionate amount of the wealth? What's the average American income then, right? Like, if we don't look at the context, then it means nothing what the average income is, because we need to consider the fact that the top, like, 1% of earners hold, like, at this point, well over half of the wealth. So it's like, what's the real average American income if we exclude those at the very top hoarding a completely disproportionate amount of wealth that they don't need and didn't really fairly earn? What's the real average that your typical American makes? Like, what if we don't include the top 1% or even the top, like, 10%? Um, so yeah, averages are extremely important and underrated, but they are also able to be abused, which is very unfortunate to constantly be having to keep both of those facts in mind. But at the end of the day, I think that is something we all owe to ourselves. While we're on the subject, I also just wanted to talk about the possible fallibility of statistics in general. And this is going to be very politically charged, everything I'm saying, guys. This is going to be a pretty divisive video, probably, but just bear in mind that I'm right. And if anyone disagrees with me, they're wrong. Just keep that in your head. Um, Statistics on their own, especially if they are statistics to do with grouping people together based off of some immutable trait, they mean nothing. On their own, they mean nothing. Without any context, without some kind of reasoning behind them, you can't fairly infer anything. Now, I'm kind of beating around the bush here, but I think everyone knows exactly what I'm referring to. The classic thing that always gets brought up when talking about statistics that have to do with a group based on a mutable trait, incarceration rates based on racial demographics. It's a very hot button issue. Um, because yes, racial minorities are disproportionately incarcerated. But here's the thing: if you look at that statistic and you you look at that statistic, you point that out, you notice it. There are two paths you can take. One of them is racist and incorrect, and one of them is not those two things. You can look at those statistics and you can assume there is some kind of inherent or just some kind of genetic basis, or you can assume that there is just some reason that minorities get arrested more often that is their fault. You can assume that, and from that you can develop some kind of irrational fear, or you can question a little bit any possible reason it might be that in America, um, Black and Hispanic people are incarcerated at a disproportionate rate. You, if you don't question it, if you don't come to a fair conclusion, then you're stupid and you're racist, and also you don't understand statistics, and that makes you just a little stupid little dummy. Because you can't look at statistics like that without historical context. You have to consider the fact that segregation only ended like 60 years ago, and that those are two groups of people that were purposefully kept in poverty and are to this day, and are over policed, and that being in poverty and being over policed are two things that are simply going to lead to a higher incarceration rate. And nobody is simply predisposed to committing any greater amount of crime based on just who they are or what they were born as. It's nurture over nature in this instance. Um, But a really unfortunate amount of people just don't know that and don't appreciate that because they don't understand statistics and they don't understand historical context. And that just really sucks for them, doesn't it? It doesn't always necessarily have to be super political. Talking about just averages, which is something I just wanted to talk about. But I think that one is pretty impossible to ignore when talking about a subject like this. I am trying to think of more innocuous examples, but as always, I don't script these, and nothing is coming to mind. So I'm gonna pause the recording real quick. Here's some innocuous, silly examples. Technically, the average number of limbs in the world is less than four, because even though they represent a minority of cases, there are people out there who are missing a limb. Even if there was only one person in the world and they were only missing their left arm, that would still mean that the average number of limbs in the entire world was some value less than four, even if it was extremely marginal. I mean, if you had a group of four people and one of them is missing an arm, technically the average number of arms is 1.75. Um, which is why the median value is very important in many instances. Important and underrated. Um, I think it's a popular statistic. I don't know if this is still the case, but I do remember being taught this in history class a little bit back that the average American household had 2.5 children. But it's like, what does that mean? You can't have half of a child, right? But it just means that if you take two households and one of them has two children and one of them has three children, across those two households, there is an average of 2.5 children because you have to add up the number of children and then divide that by the number of households. And that's just been done on a national scale. Um, I mean, it's really not just averages. Like any statistic can be skewed and manipulated. Here's one thing that gets me. If a chance of something happening goes up by a percentage, you do not just add that percentage to the original. If you have a 10% chance, but then your chances go up by 80%, you do not add 80% to 10%. It means your chances go up by 80% of 10%. So if your chances so that means you now have an 18% chance of something happening and not 90. People say that like the risk of a baby being born with certain disabilities goes up by some percentage after a woman turns 30, but it's like, okay, that doesn't actually tell me anything. Like if the risk of a child having some childbirth deformity goes up by 100% after a woman turns 34. Okay, well, what if the chance was previously 1%? Now it's 2%. And uh, okay, but people see the phrase goes up by 100% and just like, steam starts coming out of their ears. Um, or let's say like when you see headlines that say like inflation is down or inflation is at a record low, it doesn't really matter what inflation's at. It's still happening, right? Like at if it was at 10%, but now it's gone down to 3%. Well, inflation is still happening at a rate of 3%, so shit is still going to start getting more expensive. Um, wouldn't be as much of a problem if wages rose proportionately, but they do not. Um, oh yeah, surveys. What use really are do surveys do if we don't know exactly the group of people that's responding? Because here's the thing: every single time you see a survey, you know for a fact that one trait that all people share was that they're the kind of person who is willing to respond to a survey, you know? So you are never actually going to be able to gauge the true median opinion of a group of people if a large enough number of that group of people, if their opinion is I don't want to answer a survey right now. That's another thing. The Stanford prison experiment, and literally any experiment on human nature done in a majority white college doesn't measure human nature. It doesn't tell us anything about human nature. That tells us about the nature of white guys who attend an Ivy League, okay? That's not human nature. That's a very specific type of person that does not represent even nearly the majority of people. And all these studies were being shown are showing us about the nature of that group of people. And it's like I guess it's fine that we know that now, but just be honest. Don't tell us that you've found out something about human nature based on your experiments. You've found out something about 20 something college kid nature, you know? What else? Sorry guys, I made myself a lot madder than I meant to. I'm sure there's like a million more, that I could talk about, but maybe I'll just like save that for another time. I'm sure you guys pretty much get the gist of what I'm saying with this video. I'll go ahead and just end it here before I get any madder. Goodbye.